I'm really happy today to share with you a part of my PhD project, which is actually based on the analysis of bereavement scenes in New Kingdom iconography, in particular in New Kingdom tombs, mainly belonging to Tel El Amarna and Deir el Medina and the Theban area in general, but from the standpoint of modern psychology and anthropology. So, okay. Um, Basically, in my PhD project, I'm seeking to understand if some body gestures, as they are represented in New Kingdom tombs, which have clear and evident contact points with actual human reactions to loss and death, could be used to comprehend how ancient Egyptians used to cope with grief. In order to achieve this goal, I'm considering a series of gestures and poses, such as pulling hair or sustaining each other. And today I would like to focus in particular on one of these peculiar activities performed during funerary rituals, the custom of smearing one's head with dust or dirt. This habit is common to numerous cultures, both ancient and contemporary. However, of course, despite the fact that this is not a characteristic of ancient Egypt only, but nonetheless, my research pertains to this culture, I'm going to mainly talk about the ritual performed in the pharaonic society. I am perfectly aware of the fact that many of these gestures, if not the entirety of them, carry a profound and crucial symbolic value for ancient Egyptians. I do not want to question the emblematic and or allegorical meaning of these rituals. Rather, I would like to seek to understand if these symbolic gestures had an anthropological reason or a psychological urge behind them. I will not go into details, but in fact, recent cross cultural anthropology and psychology studies seem to demonstrate that despite expressions of grieving depend on many different factors, such as society, personality, background, history, and so on, and therefore are different from person to person or from culture to culture, grief itself is a universal and atemporal state, and it is common to humankind. Before getting into details about this custom, I need to present, although in a quite cursory way, some pieces of information concerning psychology and anthropology of grief. Both psychology and anthropology are crucial for my research because in death studies, they are the two sides of the same coin. Psychology is mainly focused on internal personal grief, whereas anthropology concerns the public expression of mourning. Moreover, while, especially in the past, psychology papers are or were primarily dedicated to a very selected group of people, many studies were UK or US centered, and only quite recently the psychological research has started to intensively consider also different societies. Anthropology papers often address cross cultural customs or habits, but tend to neglect the personal side of grief. That is the reason why the support of both these disciplines is fundamental for my project, and I will refer to psychology inquiries as much as anthropology ones in this presentation. Therefore, since these two disciplines are at the base of the analysis I'm conducting, I have to define with you a few aspects which are behind the study of these research projects and which turn out to be crucial for a comprehensive understanding of the phenomenon I'm describing. For instance, the use of metaphors in the grieving process as an instrument for healing after a traumatic event, such as the loss of a member of the community or even more, the loss of a loved one. According to psychology, metaphors are one of the so-called languages of grief, which are different ways in which the bereaved person reacts after the loss of someone dear and tries and communicates their feelings to other people. Metaphors are employed to describe a phenomenon with the terms of another and help the survivor open up and better deal with a traumatic event. When I talk about metaphors in psychology and death studies in general, I usually refer to a quite common expression, being heartbroken. The heart of the bereaved person is not actually in pieces, but the feeling is worthy of comparison. The survivor feels like their heart is crushed and tries and communicates this pain to others who are not experiencing the same suffering. Psychologists claim that metaphors are used to indicate taboo subjects or matters that are particularly harder to accept and process, as the death of a significant other. They are employed as a sort of filter. They help the bereaved signify the trauma and get over it more easily. However, metaphors are not only verbal, they can also be visual or physical. A gesture, a pose, a body expression can be used to communicate something different than the mere act. An example of this kind of metaphors could be this Byzantine mosaic, where two birds are represented one in front of the other. They both symbolize the human soul, but the one within the cage metaphorically represents the soul trapped inside the body, whereas the other represents the soul liberated by death. Numerous studies have been conducted on visual metaphors, not only in psychology and anthropology, but also in Egyptology. As for what concerns the Egyptological side, however, none of these studies, at least to my knowledge, had a specific focus on scenes related to bereavement from the psychological standpoint on languages of grief. I decided to indulge for a while on metaphors in psychology because, according to some scholars, the main subject of this presentation, therefore the custom of spreading dirt over the head in bereavement contexts, could have a metaphoric connotation. We will get to it in a moment. However, in order to better comprehend this eventual metaphoric aspect of this gesture, first of all, we have to take a look at the way in which this ritual action is performed. Of course, the details of this rite differ from culture to culture, but here I would like to discuss the ritual in general and highlight the numerous common points that this custom has among the various societies. Therefore, generally speaking, both men and women, another crucial aspect to take into account, can participate in this ritual, which involves three main elements: the remains of the deceased, or something that is strictly related to them, the mourner, in particular their head, in most cases together with numerous other mourners, and the substance to be poured upon the head: dust, dirt, soil, sometimes ash. In some cases, and we have multiple examples in New Kingdom iconography, mourners are also represented while collecting dust, dirt, soil from the ground and placing it over their head. Usually, this substance is depicted with a different color than the one employed to depict the mourner's hair, in order to make it more visible and not to mistake it with the hair itself. In a very interesting paper, Benjamin Abocci Ntrecho, by analyzing the gesture of pouring dust upon the head during contemporary mourning ceremonies, also seeks to examine the origin of this act by looking at funerary rituals in ancient times. His standpoint is not based on a psychological approach, but he still refers to anthropology while describing this custom. Even if his paper is more focused on Jewish Christian version of the action, this excursus on the roots of this gesture is quite interesting, since it marks the fact that, albeit with its differences, the ritual of pouring dust or dirt upon the head in mourning circumstances is common to various cultures, despite different epochs. One of the aspects highlighted by Nthrek in the analysis of ancient funerary rituals is the importance of the link between soil and humankind. This relationship both concerns life and death. Therefore, when humans come to life and when they depart from it. Regarding the first part, this link soil-humankind is usually exemplified in myths related to the origin of the word, where clay, for example, is used to forge humanity in many traditions. Of course, ancient Egyptian mythology is not exempt for this typology of cosmogony, and see, for instance, Khnum and his molding clay to give life to humans. However, As mentioned, the strict connection between soil and people also emerges when referring to death. In many ancient and contemporary cultures, in fact, the sky, the above, is the abode of gods and goddesses, whereas the below, the underground, is rather linked to the realm of the dead. Basically, the earth is often perceived as the place where humans go after they die. However, not only soil dust is an important element to consider, also the fact that this substance is spewed over the head and not any other part of the body is another crucial fact to take into account. Why the head? What is or was its value in such a mourning ritual? Since it is associated with senses, sight, hearing, taste, the head plays an incredibly important role in the construction of what is human. Obviously, the relevance of the head is not limited to the ancient Egyptian culture, but just to give you an example related to the main theme of this research project, one of the major purposes of the opening of the mouth ritual was in fact to make the deceased able to use their senses again. And the most emblematic gesture related to the ceremony was the touching of the mouth with the mesquite. However, not only senses should be taken into account while pointing out the importance of the choice of scattering dust or dirt upon the head. Another reason behind the profound relevance of the head as something strictly connected with being human is the symbolic value given by ancient Egyptians to hair. In ancient Egypt, in fact, as in other ancient cultures, hair was a symbol of identity. It was used to express someone's individuality. Sometimes it was also offered and placed into tombs, or according to some scholars, employed as a sort of signature to certify something. The fact that dust or dirt was deliberately scattered over the head, and in particular upon the hair of the mourner, is a crucial point to consider. Perhaps this gesture could also be associated with another custom related to bereavement, the habit of pulling or splitting their own hair. Due to the short time, I'm not going to indulge too much on this other peculiar ritual action, but I believe that the possible link between these two gestures should be contemplated. Since hair was a symbol of identity in ancient Egypt, it is possible that the decision of pulling, splitting hair during funerary rituals could be considered as an indication of the urgency to modify or even erase their own identity, and perhaps also the choice of pouring dust or dirt upon the head metaphorically signify the same necessity. This identity issue, why is this so important when discussing body gestures related to bereavement? According to psychology and anthropology, a traumatic event like the death of a member of the community affects the society itself and can cause the transformation of the communal identification of those who mourn the deceased. As claimed by these disciplines, someone's identity is the production of a series of social relationships which are necessarily perturbed after the death of a member of the community, especially if the deceased is particularly close to the survivor. Therefore, the grieving process is considered also a sort of journey through the identity of an individual who is forced to face an important change in their identification in the community after a loss. The change of identity can be perceived in multiple ways. For example, the survivor can feel it as a metamorphosis into someone different, from daughter, son to orphan, for instance. In this case, grief can be considered also a sort of rite of passage from a previous interpersonal identity to a brand new one. However, the bereaved person can also perceive this change of identity as a sort of symbolic death of themselves. And these, in particular, is the aspects that might correlate the two customs, pulling hair and pouring dust upon the head. And according to some scholars, can describe the habit of spreading dirt over the head as a metaphor in terms of languages of grief, obviously. Let's step back for a moment and proceed by degrees. Much of the anthropological research related to the action of pouring dirt over the head as a sign of mourning actually belongs to religious studies, which are mainly focused on the Jewish version of this custom. However, as I mentioned at the very beginning of this presentation, despite some eventual differences among diverse cultures, which perform this ritual in a slightly dissimilar way, the general framework of this gesture is basically the same. And therefore, these studies as well might contain some crucial pieces of information related to this habit in the ancient Egyptian culture. One of the most interesting aspects that emerged from these studies is the possibility that the dirt used in the rite has a strong symbolic meaning. According to numerous scholars, in fact, dust might be linked to the soil that covered, and in some cultures still covers, the grave. As first claimed by Maurice Jastrow, this custom could also have a connection to an iconography shown on the Babylonian so-called Stela of Vultures, where a series of people are represented while building funerary mounds, and in particular by carrying over their head baskets containing soil. Therefore, according to this school of thought, the use of scattering dust upon the head during mourning rituals might be a symbolic representation of the custom of building funerary mounds by using a series of baskets filled with soil which were carried over the head. This anthropological explanation could definitely be possible, but what if there was also a psychological reason behind this ritual action? According to other scholars, in fact, the dust that mourners pour and poured in the past should represent the one from the grave, or even more particularly, the dust from the grave that the survivor feels they have been buried in. As already mentioned, when someone dies, especially when someone close dies, there's a crucial issue related to the identity of the bereaved person, who often feels a profound pain which can be comparable to death itself. See, for instance, the example of being heartbroken mentioned before. As claimed by Utrecht, this idea is that the potency of death is felt so greatly at the death of a person. Thus, for a person to escape the blow of a death, one has to identify oneself with the dead. Consequently, the action of pouring dust over the head might represent a metaphor, a way for the mourner to bury themselves and try and get over the death of a loved person. To conclude, the study that I've presented today is still a work in progress research, and I'm aware of the fact that I still have a lot of work to do and many elements to deepen. One of these is the possible difference among the various substances during this ritual. Dust, dirt, soil, ash. Are these really interchangeable, or do they carry diverse significances? Why, in some cases, mourners employ ash rather than soil? Would it be possible to discern which substances were preferred by ancient Egyptians by looking at tomb iconography? This is just one of the numerous aspects that I still have to expand, but nonetheless, the research that I've gone so far seems to present at least the possibility that a psychological and anthropological reason could be behind the symbolism of this iconic mourning action. I still have to deepen and better define this study. Therefore, every comment or suggestion would be much appreciated. And I would like to thank you very much. And I also would like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Antonio Auricchio, Dr. Lucrezia Tomberli, and Dr. Rebecca Rastrelli for their valuable help and advice during this research so far. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Valentina. That was absolutely fascinating. We'll just quickly see, are there any questions here in person? Okay, over there. I guess we'll just run around. Can I just pass this down?
Thank you, Valentina, for that talk. I was interested around, I guess, what you were talking about anthropology, the anthropology side of it, because you covered a lot around the psychology. From the anthropology side, is there much work done in terms of like the ontology of grief? So exploring stuff from coming from within the culture, and how that might inform how we understand grief or grief and the gestural practices that the Egyptians did in the past. Would you potentially be able to elaborate on that?
Thank you so much for your question. Yeah, unfortunately, I didn't have enough time to discuss also in details of the anthropological side of the project actually in general, not only of this specific aspect. The main problem with anthropology studies, of course, related to what I'm trying to research, is the fact that they are mainly focused on the public expression of grief. So basically, they are focused on mourning, and therefore how the death rituals connected with death are performed and are considered as part of the community, which is a fundamental part for my study. But at the same time, it actually can't really embrace the totality of what I would like to seek with my research, which is the internal side, the personal side of grief. And therefore, yes, absolutely, anthropology studies are of greater importance. But in this case as well, they just cover a side of the whole research topic. I hope I actually answered, but I'm not sure. So please tell me.
Thank you. Yes. Other questions? Okay. I'll try to get as close as possible and then might just have to pass it down. It's
Hello, thank you for your very interesting talk. I had a bit of a question about whether the ritual was only performed by a certain group of individuals. So, was it just for close kin? Was it not close kin? Just with regards to kind of like rituals or thinking about rituals and how they relate to things like inheritance rights and stuff like that, and kind of what particular individuals in families, what roles they have within the kind of funerary sphere. So yeah, I don't know if you could speak more on that at all. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. That is an aspect that I wasn't able to discuss during the presentation, mainly because I'm still working on it. So thank you for pointing this out. I'm not sure about the answer so far, because there are some tombs where the people who are actually performing this ritual are members of the family, mainly sons of the deceased. In other cases, they are actually mourners, so they seem not to be related with the deceased. So I'm currently working on this aspect, and I would like to learn more about the possible relationship with these people, the deceased, the community, and maybe why not also the substance that was used for the ritual itself.
Thank you. Any other questions? And then I'm going to quickly check on Zoom to see if we have any. Okay. Do we have any in the chat on Zoom? Yes? Oh, okay. Do you want to read them and I can just bring this over? I don't know the best way to get to you. Give me a minute. I'll do the same thing. Okay. Thanks.
Hi, Valentina. So we have a question from John. He says, great talk and selected bibliography. Do you think persistence of mourning practices and mourning imagery can somehow be the opposite of mythic timelessness, understanding mourning as the liminal space between life and death?
That's a wonderful question. And unfortunately, I don't know. I mean, that's definitely something that I need to deepen. And I would like to thank John for pointing this out. Um, I don't know. Unfortunately, I don't know. A thing that I want for sure to deepen is the relationship between ancient rituals and contemporary ones, because, as I mentioned, since grief is considered as something atemporal, something that is common to humankind rather than a specific culture or a specific society, I would like to learn more about this possibility and therefore the relationship between ancient and contemporary rituals. But unfortunately, for the moment, I'm not able to have a proper answer to this question. But thank you so much for pointing this out.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to talk about, and a further avenue of research. I've got another question.
Mhm.
Are there ancient Egyptian texts referring to throwing dirt or ash on the hair during mourning? Do the texts above the mourner scenes where this iconography appears refer to this?
Could you please repeat the last part of the question, because I had some audio issues? The first part is the one related with text.
Yes, so the last bit is, do the texts above the mourner scenes where this iconography appears refer to this?
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's another thing that unfortunately I haven't still looked at. For the moment, I'm focusing on iconography, but I know for sure that I have to consider also texts, because otherwise I can't have a comprehensive view on the subject. So I really hope that text will help me on this. But for the moment, I'm just focusing on iconography, and in particular, iconography in tombs. So a very specific part of it. But thank you very much. I definitely need to do it.
And we've got another one. Is there enough published iconographic data for New Kingdom tombs to show a consistent trend for the change of the colour for the dirt/ash versus hair?
Wonderful question. Unfortunately, no, at least to my knowledge, again. But I would like to implement this part. I'm working on a database which potentially in the future would be available for the public. And I would like to work on this as well. So the database is actually focused on scenes related to bereavement, and in particular, of course, scenes related to grief and mourning. So, of course, the main topics of my research. But due to this fact, I would also like to add information, other pieces of information concerning the different aspects of these images, including the color of ashes and dirt and dust and all the other possible substances in relation with the color of the hair of the mourners. So not for the moment, but I hope in the future that would be this database available for the public as well.